Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for the complimentary ICMI webinar, Agent Productivity and Efficiency in the Multi-Channel Contact Center, sponsored by InContact. I'm Erica Strother, Community Specialist at ICMI, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we begin, let's take care of a few housekeeping items. First, make sure you disable your pop-up blocker if it's on. You will notice there are several icons at the bottom of the console window. The first allows you to see the presentation slides, so make sure this one is maximized. Next is the Q&A icon. We will be hosting a live Q&A throughout this webinar, and you can participate by asking questions at any time throughout the presentation. All you have to do is type your question into that window and then click Submit. We'll also be posing some open-ended questions throughout this event, and we ask that you use the Q&A platform to submit your answers. Now, if you're experiencing any technical difficulties during the presentation, you can click the question mark icon on the console to access the event help guide. We will be conducting a couple of polls during this presentation, and we encourage your participation. This webinar is meant to be interactive for everyone, so please share your opinions. On that note, we encourage you to be social throughout this event. You can access your Twitter, LinkedIn, or Facebook accounts directly through this console. Clicking on the other icons on the console will give you access to speaker bios, more information about our sponsor InContact, as well as information about upcoming ICMI events. You can also download a version of today's presentation in PDF form. And now it is my pleasure to introduce to you today's esteemed speakers. Speaking on behalf of ICMI is ICMI's Content Director, Sarah Steely-Reed. And speaking for our sponsor InContact is Madeline Gingelbach, Director of Product Marketing at InContact. At this time, I'll turn things over to Sarah to kick off today's presentation.
Thanks, Erica. And thanks to everyone for joining us today. And as Erica said, I really want to encourage you to be social and tweet about what you learn here. Our handles and hashtags are up on screen. And even after today's webinar, we really hope that you'll keep the conversations going. So our goals for today are pretty simple. We want to show you that the operational effectiveness of the contact center does not need to be sacrificed by adding new channels. It just takes a little understanding of how efficiency, productivity, and engagement are all tied together. We'll share with you some yet-to-be-published research results from the recent ICMI and InContact survey, the agent experience in the multi-channel world. And this will help you develop a plan for multi-channel so that you can prepare your contact center with data and best practices, all of which will help your agents perform better. We're going to talk about the typical challenges that arise when multi-channel options are added into the contact center, the new demands placed on the agent, what the contact center can do to mitigate, and give you an understanding of the best technology investments and the right agent tools to satisfy the connected customer, the on-demand agent, and the always strapped contact center. Let's jump into some of the research, shall we? The agent experience in the multi-channel world results really represented the whole of our community. We had all major contact center roles and leadership positions respond. And contact centers of all sizes were represented. Chances are you are seeing your company, your peers, and your voice here. Regardless of who you are or what channels you support, you're going to find relevancy in the data we discovered and the themes we uncovered. Speaking of themes, wow, your contact centers are really, really busy. According to our research, almost 86% of contact centers support at least 2 channels. Not surprisingly, most of our survey respondents reported that they are supporting the traditional channels of phone and email. Web inquiries are also a strong channel, with IVR and offline reporting healthy numbers. The point is, multi-channel is here. Madeline, I'm curious, are you all at InContact seeing the same thing?
We really are. With our customer base, our experience has been that, of course, phone and email are there, and that often web as a channel ends up being handled as email because it's web forms. And that kind of takes us into these emerging channels, this different channel demand. How does it impact the contact center and the agent experience as well? Is that customers, here's some research from Ovum that was released in the past year or so. And the interesting part here, at least to me, is that if you look over on the far right-hand side, the voice channel's not going away. What's interesting is all these other channels are emerging and their demands, and this is pull demand from customers themselves saying, I would like to interact with your company in these different ways. And that's something that's changing swiftly from just a couple years ago to the present. So that's one part of that story, but it's not the only part. And on this next slide, it's not just these different channels that are being demanded by the customer. It's that their expectations around how quickly people have to respond is simply accelerating over time. I might have been able to sit around for a business day a few 10, 15 years ago, but now I'm expecting a response often within the same day or in a few minutes. And that's placing a lot of demands on not only the contact center, meaning handling all those channels, but of course the agent as well, which is I have this response pressure because, hey, everybody wants to do a good job. So it's this idea of trying to satisfy your customers, provide that great experience, do it efficiently, and also the agents are involved in that response. And they're also involved in the interaction of these different channels. And so from a best practices standpoint, part of mitigating and trying to cope with these different channels that are being demanded by customers and that interactive response and that response time being quicker is to try and eliminate dead ends in your customer experience when they choose to engage with you. So for instance, these options for engagement, they change. And it becomes an issue around how do you handle people when they choose to, for instance, from a voice channel, redirecting and having scheduled callbacks offered, or different channels. So wherever they choose to engage, they have other options. And it's great when you're in a multi-channel situation, you don't just always have to offer voice. You can offer other channels. But often, you offer these options, it still comes back to the agent, Sarah. You know, it's this idea of I've got different options, but in the end it ends up back up at the agent handling these different channels frequently.
Okay, so what I'm hearing from you then is that even with all these channels, regardless of the channel, the more traditional, the emerging, the agent is still important. In fact, they might actually now be more important than ever. And you mentioned that customer pull, that demand for more channels and the increased efficiency or immediacy of response. Well, that actually sounds like it's putting even more demand and more pressure on the agent. But before we dive into that a little bit more, do you mind if I ask the audience a quick question?
Sure.
All right. So up on your screen, this is a really simple yet a fascinating question. And we want to know, does your contact center believe that happy agents make happy customers? Simple question, but a really powerful one. So if you wouldn't mind, we'll give you just a quick second to put in your response.
Yeah, while we're waiting for those results, Sarah, you know, this whole point of the agent being involved in these different channels, what's interesting, and I think this is part of the reason why we're not seeing a decrease in demand on the voice side, is that customers want to engage with companies more frequently. They're starting in other channels, but once it gets to the voice or it gets to any of the channels where it's one-on-one with an agent, the stakes are higher because some of the simpler questions are answered in some of those other channels.
Yeah, and look at this. 97%, agree that happy agents, do make happy customers. And as most of us know, that is the case. And over 85% of our recent ICMI survey respondents also reported that, yes, happy agents make happy customers. And that's truly making that agent experience even more critical. That number is up 5% from when we asked the same question earlier this year. And an additional 92% of consumers report that a customer service agent's perceived happiness actually has a direct impact on their experience, with the company. So it isn't just with the agent. It actually is reflecting out to that entire organization. But, it seems that we're exhausting our agents with some of these new demands. Keith Dawson from Oven said earlier this year that there's a direct correlation between the contact center agent and the customer experience. And Madeline, you said that customers want more channels, and we depend on the agents to facilitate that. So it's clear that that agent's role is evolving.
Absolutely.
I'd like to ask the audience another quick question to gauge that opinion and experience. Let us know, has your contact center identified these linkages between employee engagement and satisfaction and a better customer experience? And not only do we want to know your yes or no answer, but we'd really love to hear how. So in the Q&A format, if you wouldn't mind just sending us the ways you've identified these linkages, we'll talk about those either during our Q&A portion or during a follow-up article on ICMI.com. Because again, we think it's just so powerful. So let's take a quick look here. And yeah, so the contact center, about 60%, 61% of you have already identified those linkages. And why is that so powerful? Our research was right in line with this. 65% of our research respondents had identified that. And that number is even higher for those contact centers that measure both engagement and satisfaction of the agent. It's honestly no longer enough to just measure satisfaction. You'll have to go to that next level of engagement. And let's get into this a little bit more. So if agent happiness impacts the customer experience, then an agent's experience naturally is going to impact an agent's happiness. But it doesn't just stop there. An agent's experience impacts an agent's happiness, which influences that customer experience, which likewise affects the customer's lifetime value to an organization. And so now we're getting into the real crux of this. But the conversation here is about engagement. So where now does engagement fit into that? Well, it's right here. It's right here, and engagement matters. When we surveyed our greater audience in Q3 of this year, we found that 67% of people feel their customers are only moderately engaged. And while that's good, it definitely can be better, because companies need to really be striving for what we call extreme engagement. And how are they going to get there? Well, it's all about that agent. And since their experiences and their happiness ultimately impacts that customer, the true key is going to be increasing their engagement. And that's where the real power is. But so how do we, in the meantime, prevent the exhaustion of the agent and the inevitable loss of engagement that's going to come along with it? Well, that's where we have to go all the way back to the beginning and that agent experience. And as we know, it's comprised of many, many things, including customers, channels that we've already talked about, and the changes that are happening within the contact center. And so, let's talk about multi-channel. How are those channel choices that all of you are introducing into your contact center and the processes, training, and technology you provide really impacting, that agent experience? What are we doing to them? So last poll here, and we'd really like to know, again, if you've seen the contact center, linkages between the employee engagement and satisfaction and efficiency. And trust me, we are going to get around to that agent productivity and efficiency. So let us know, and again, we want to hear how. If you have great stories around those linkages that you've seen, we'd certainly like to hear from you. All right, so let's see what the audience has to say. Again, 60% have established those linkages. Very interesting information. So that all comes down to, again, what we require out of our agents. And how many times have you all heard this? I don't think your agents are as efficient as they should be. Can you increase their schedule adherence and reliability, and make sure you're meeting all of their service levels? And don't forget about the accuracy of the data that agents are inputting into the CRM. In fact, your CSAT is great, your contact center and your agents seem to be efficient and reliable, but they can do better. We want higher performing, we want more accuracy. Sounds a lot like a typical day in a contact center, but now add 3 more channels by next month and don't lose any momentum on efficiency, reliability, performance, and accuracy. Just keep pushing your agents harder. And so what happens is we continue to ask more and we end up getting less. And once that agent productivity goes on the decline, we're right back here again with that exhausted agent. And you were all in agreement with our last poll, and the respondents of our survey said the same thing. Over 2/3 of them absolutely saw the correlation between agent engagement and efficiency. And the reason we ask this is as equally important as the data output itself, because honestly, there's too much blame being put right now on multi-channel for the productivity and efficiency challenges within the contact center. And the fact is, it's really not the fault of multi-channel. Adding more channels isn't the root cause of inefficiency and lower productivity. It's actually the processes, training, and technology. But we'll get into that in a minute. The point is, our data shows that a large number of contact centers actually didn't see agent engagement decrease with the addition of the new channels. And 36% of them actually saw an improvement. And the best news, CSAT and first contact resolution actually went up as well. So, Madeline,
I got to jump in with this. I love this research. The other thing that's interesting about that I just had to interrupt you is the voice channel is still central, but this particular research from last year by CCSI I thought was fascinating, because here we're talking about the voice channels and how people are still choosing that a lot of the time. But what's interesting is that a lot of times they feel like that's the only channel that they can choose, and if they could choose a different channel, which is the lighter colored blue bar, they felt like not only would they be able to get their question answered in the way that they wanted, but that their satisfaction with that company would go up. And I thought that was so interesting, is that I may choose voice, but if I'm offered other alternatives, my CSAT would go up because I had those other alternatives.
And that's a great point. And actually, we saw similar numbers earlier this year. And when we asked a similar type question, our consumers said that they would be more satisfied 93% of the time if they could get customer service through their preferred channel. So just like you said, they're happy, but they could be even happier. And our audience responses showed that it's not just phone and email and web, but that self-service is now really becoming a channel preference. But I digress a little bit. Okay, Madeline, I really need some help here. If agent efficiency and engagement are correlated, and engagement isn't necessarily being negatively impacted by adding new channels, and customers are saying they want more channels, then why isn't everyone becoming more and more multi-channel?
Well, it's a great question. I think a lot of it has to do with risk factors. Contact centers today, they've always been, I've worked in them for years, they're mission critical. People look at it and say, the phones have to be answered, the emails have to be answered. All these things have to be done because it's a primary connection point to customers. So it's mission critical. And you're spending all your time trying to get your scheduling right so that you're not over or understaffed. And you get all of that very careful, the balancing act that you're constantly doing. It's like, oh my gosh, if I add that extra channel, it's just going to blow everything up. And so that's one of the key risk factors is the schedule. A lot of people are concerned about AHT. It feels risky. It feels risky, even though people want to do it,
And that's a great point. And the risk is something that I think we really need to talk a little bit more about. But here's, some of the other reasons why, based on our real-world survey results. For starters, the contact center and the agents really need to become better aligned. Right now, it seems that there's a big misunderstanding between what the contact center is reporting, what they say their KPIs need to be, and what the agent is being actually measured on. We all know that agents need and like to know how they're doing. And contact centers are now complaining that AHT is on the rise with multi-channel, and that message is actually getting down to the agents. And as we've talked about so many times, AHT shouldn't be a primary metric that agents are concerned with, but now they're becoming more so. And then many of the new channels, and I'm going to pick on social just a little bit here, don't have defined agent KPI goals at all. And back to your risk concept, here's the risk. Because of all of this, agents start becoming frustrated. They're losing focus and engagement, and then they start to do things. They start to have behaviors that we don't like. They start to make errors and even, start showing up late for work. Those are all things that signify, a lack of true agent engagement. And then training is also an area that's impacting productivity and efficiency. Again, it's not the fault of the channels. It's the lack of processes and that we're putting around these new ones. 34% of the community is saying that multi-channel agents require more training, and then another quarter acknowledge that they actually need different training to hone those multi-channel skills. So let's give it to them. And then I hate to pick on social again, but agents themselves are saying that social customer service training is inadequate. There are ways, there are places, if you don't have this type of training internally, that you can get it. And it's so important, particularly when the agents are saying, we want more training, we need more training. And then I have to bring this up because it's no wonder our agents are tired and confused. But the contact center hasn't truly been able to get a solid grasp, it seems, on forecasting volume for multi-channel. So that's leaving agents with mismatched schedules and inconsistent shifts. Sometimes there's crazy high volume, and then other times there's big lulls. Not that that's completely abnormal in a contact center, but as we're adding in these new channels, we just don't seem to be forecasting as well. And in fact, 50% of our respondents said that forecasting and scheduling for multi-channel is actually extremely important to them, yet only a quarter of them acknowledge that they're doing it very well. And that's taking a toll on KPIs and agent metrics. So it sounds a bit like we've come full circle again. Madeline, there's some talk about using channel experimentation to mitigate damage to KPIs. Can you elaborate on that one a little bit?
Yeah, I can, and I guess that's something that we feel pretty passionately about, that a lot of these risk factors, these hesitancies around adding channels, like kind of channel plus one, however many you've got, adding that next channel that makes sense for your company, we would encourage an incremental approach, which is experiment first and then expand your channels. So kind of reviewing those common concerns that you mentioned, they're saying, hey, I'm concerned about different things around multi-channel. Sometimes it's simply that the system itself can't handle it, or we can't afford the module, the upgrade's too expensive to add the channel. Staffing is always a concern, as you mentioned, and the research proved out. Also, the whole issue of policies and processes can create a hurdle to overcome. So it's like, well, I'm not sure how to adapt my policies to this new channel. And then sometimes it's just a feeling, because I'm mission critical, I've got my all these different measures I've got to meet and all these demands, I just don't even know where to start. So if we start with people who are going to add some basic channels, first of all, experimentation is powerful because, one, you can start small, sometimes very, very small, and gain an understanding of its potential with your business, your customer base, and also your operations in the contact center. Furthermore, you can work out kinks, you can establish those procedures and adapt those before you roll it out. And control expectations as well, because if you're experimenting, you have test accounts, and you can set some good expectations that it is a test, and then the other opportunity is by the time you expand it, you can optimize those outcomes as you begin to roll it out to more agents in the contact center. So if we look at, so you want to get started, maybe you're voice only today. What would be the next channel you should add? We would recommend either email or chat. Email, as you saw in the research, is the most common second channel. Part of the advantage of email and adding that on is that it's asynchronous, meaning that there is an expectation of delay with that channel. It's not immediate communication. So you can mitigate some of that risk because you have a natural lull there. It's getting shorter, but it's still more than an active voice call or even chat. It is also the easiest to enable on an informal basis without having to publicize or publish something to your website. For instance, you can you can have an email address, a group email address that can go out to a selected test account, so it's very easy to control. Chat's the next one up. It's a more synchronous channel. There's a little bit of wait expected, but it's pretty close to real time. And it's very popular as a web page connection. Agents can handle more than one session at a time, so you can see about handling multiple contacts simultaneously. It's also a good way to experiment with queue priority versus other channels. The other thing I might mention is that this can be a channel that appeals to millennial agents especially because of their preponderance or their predilection for multitasking. They're high texters, which is a similar corollary to chat, for instance. That's a good one to experiment if you have a lot of millennials, to give them some channel variety. So that's if you're adding, individual channels and you're kind of new to it. But regardless of channels, what we would recommend is whatever your channel plus one, that new channel is, start small and create a plan. Do your best to control the access, your customers' access, and if you can create that experiment, try and look for friendlies to participate. Define that test plan before and what you plan to measure before you even get started, so you can measure its change to your KPIs. You can measure whether it's producing the results that you're looking for. The other thing is selecting agents for the test is important. Just because an agent is great in voice does not mean they're going to be great in a written channel, and vice versa, I might add. So, for instance, we're seeing changes in hiring practices in multi-channel contact centers by screening first, even before they get to verbal, always doing writing samples and other items as a screening practice for hiring to prepare them for being in that multi-channel world. That's one example. The other thing is you select the agents carefully for their skills and also for their ability to provide you with feedback to optimize. Hey, why don't we change this? This might make it better, so they can help co-create those new policies and processes. So you begin with that type of center of excellence and that experiment, and then gradually expand the agents eligible in increments as you get your sea legs. So that's the experimentation idea.
I like that. All right. So I get email and chat experimentation, but what about the second tier of growing channels like social and self-service that we mentioned earlier? Mm-hmm. I mean, because it seems that the emerging channels, although they're not as prevalent yet, contact centers are absolutely acknowledging the value and the need. They're listening, to their customers. And when we reached out to our community earlier this year, 67% of them said that they consider social to be a necessary channel. 55% said that it actually improves that overall customer experience. And then another 84% thought self-service was a requirement. And as you see in the charts, both respondents felt that both social and self-service were actually competitive differentiators for them.
We certainly agree. This is a kind of an oft-quoted excerpt from a Gartner paper around social media that it's accelerating, and that by refusing to engage in social media, it can become as harmful as ignoring, for instance, the two most popular channels today being phone or email. So social media is growing in necessity to respond. However, again, you've got that risk factor of how do I handle it right? And if we look at social as a channel, what we would advise is to listen carefully with social. I kind of picked this black and white picture because because we're feeling like we're going into this new frontier. This is this new technology, and maybe we're this new way to engage with customers, and it feels unfamiliar. True. However, we would encourage you that, yes, it's time to start engaging, but you've got to listen carefully. Let me explain a little more about that. Social media is a channel that has a lot of traffic. There are a lot of mentions or topics that people are constantly tweeting about or Facebook posting about or blogging about that could be relevant to your company. But the art and the science of it is that in this huge stream of interactions that are happening, which ones do you pick? Which ones do you select to actually work on? And that's the central point. The central point here is that all of these different social media posts are not equal. Not all of them require a response. And so what we would recommend as you begin to engage in social media is make sure and have a lot of filters on mentions and responses. Of course, keyword searches alone are helpful, but they are insufficient. You've got to have some rules around it, business rules around those filters. Furthermore, before you even get started, do some thinking about your customer base. Begin to monitor social media before you engage and determine guidelines for response. So something as easy this is publishing your social care hours of operation, for instance, on your Twitter profile or your Facebook page, so that you're setting expectations about when people are actually monitoring the queue. You need to decide what you will or will not respond to. Make those choices. If people give you this awesome positive response, do I want to spend time to respond to it, or which ones would I respond to, positive or negative? And set some internal SLAs on timeliness for response, because in essence it becomes the voice of the brand. So those are some general ideas about filtering and setting guidelines for posts, but it actually doesn't stop there, because how you mechanically, the technological mechanics of doing social media service, we would advise you to be a choosy shopper and look for social media solutions that are purpose-built for service. Many systems started as a marketing platform for simple outbound transmission into social media channels. It's not necessarily engineered for inbound. So filtering for service is different than filtering for marketing. So the irrelevant posts impact both the agent experience, because if I'm assigned to social and I'm constantly filtering through the sea of stuff that I don't really have to handle, that's not fun. And it's not efficient, and that's the other side. So it helps improve the agent experience and, from the operational goals, the efficiency as well. So that's social, but let's go back to that self-service. So we've talked about IVR a lot, but self-service is broader than that. And what's changing, and I think why it's an emerging channel, is that we would invite you to look at self-service as your first agent and view it as an agent, an active and dynamic process. Now, if we look at self-service, and actually some research that we did, Sarah, with y'all's company recently, specifically around IVR, I mean, is self-service, and IVR is the common channel for that, is it really something to set and forget? And we would argue no. And a lot of people aren't spending time on self-service. They're not measuring completion rates in their IVR. They're not necessarily knowing how often customers are opting out of the simple IVR to see if it's really meeting customers' needs and how effective it is. And what we would encourage, as I mentioned, is self-service is your first agent, and reframe it in that context, which says how much time, compare the amount of time that you're spending on the agents and evaluating, training, and nurturing them and coaching them. Are you spending 1%, 2%, 5% as much time on your self-service options because it's even broader than IVR today. It's your web resources, if you have a community forum, if you have a mobile application, all of these items move into a self-service strategy. So we'd invite you to look at it as your first agent. And if you reframe it that way, it can become a dynamic tool to manage that customer experience, which helps them become more engaged. It also helps the agent experience because the customer is taking care of needs that they would prefer in other channels. So when they engage with your agents, they're doing it because they want to talk to the agent, not because they necessarily have to, because they're getting their needs met in other ways.
Okay, I love that, and you are so right. And thanks for bringing it back to the agent and back to this whole concept of the tools that not just the customer needs, but that the agent needs as well. Because we all need to remember, it does come back to that agent experience. And agents today, even our best agents, are not having the best experience. And this is directly impacting that agent happiness that we were referring to earlier. Well, Aberdeen says that 26% of an agent's time is spent looking for relevant data across all of our different systems, and our own survey supported that data, that agents use an average of 5 screens for each customer interaction. That's a lot of wasted time that they could be using to actually help customers instead. It's also frustrating for an agent to have to navigate all through these different systems. So they've got something for Facebook, something for Twitter, voice is being handled or through something else, email through one system, chat through another. And the major pain points for agents are having to navigate the different windows, not having easy access to customer information, doing all this double work with retyping, cutting and pasting, and then they have this inability to hit those performance metrics due to a lot of these system barriers. And then finally, agents are reporting that their desktop problems and the challenges that they're having with all these multiple screens are impacting the customer as well, and that the customer is oftentimes not trusting them with their capabilities because it's taking them much longer than it should to actually find information. So what's the answer? How do we get our agents out of this mess of multiple systems and platforms? Is it worth trying to fix? Is it worth unifying? And Madeline, I have to know, what's your opinion on singular desktop systems versus, multiple versus universal? What do you think about all this?
Well, it's a great question, and it's a complex one, but what we would say is that it's really about simplifying the agent experience, simplifying their ability to navigate. And there's different ways that you can tackle that. One is by simply consolidating the number of screens and reducing the ones that they have to navigate through. Another approach is to have, for instance, like a unified or customized desktop, and that's another way to accomplish it. It's a lot more resource intensive for the company, and it can take longer to implement. They're both valid approaches, but and we'll talk about that in a minute. But there's some ways that you can make both of those optimized. But they're both valid approaches because the spirit of all this, regardless of which direction that you choose, this idea of kind of consolidating to try and reduce the number of screens that you have to navigate, or unifying them all on kind of the Lord of the Rings, one screen to rule them all kind of thing. Either one of those, the spirit behind it is I'm trying to simplify the experience for the agent so that they can so that they can answer those questions more quickly.
And we're absolutely seeing that agent productivity and efficiency is positively affected by simplifying that desktop. And we discovered that it's not only making those customer interactions easier for the agent, but that it's also increasing the collaboration between agents and their supervisors and their managers. And then it's eliminating those big pain points that we talked about earlier. And then let's not overlook the fact that 90% of agents that we talk to say that they are actually happier with those simplified desktops. So that's an awful lot of wins. But let's jump back into the norm for a second. And, because not only is the typical agent desktop confusing and complex, but so is the methodology in which, they're actually getting those customers. Of the top 5 highest volume channels in the contact center, a large portion of them are not automatically routed, through the ACD to the agent. Not surprising, email is not auto-routed, but that becomes problematic when you consider that it's the second highest volume channel for most centers. And since the routing is ad hoc, it's impacting the agent's productivity, and we're right back into that correlation that we talked about earlier. And it negatively affects the contact center's ability to forecast and schedule. So there are a lot of connections between process, technology, and the experience that we keep talking about. And if that weren't enough, there's no clear process for determining which channels an agent should prioritize. So it's often left up to them to determine. With only 28% of agents being universal upon hiring, that leaves some channels potentially under-supported. And I'd love to get your opinion on universal, dedicated, or both. But we're kind of running out of time, so I would like to save that idea for our Q&A section, if that's all right with you.
Yep, you bet.
All right, so it's all coming back to this. What the heck are we doing to our agents? No matter, it's no surprise that they're exhausted and the contact center is feeling that impact, to productivity and efficiency. When we asked the community how their agents had been affected by multi-channel, they reported, no surprise again, that agents are needing to learn those new technologies and processes, that they're having to navigate around more screens and interfaces, and that the agents are getting distracted, by all the options that they have. But the bottom line, is this: it's the less efficient we make the agent, the less happy they are, which makes them less productive. And all of those things are pretty easy to overcome. But they take time and they require some planning and preparation like we talked about earlier. So while your contact center may already be multi-channel, you can still alleviate the impact to productivity and efficiency when you add in the next channel by using those best practices that Madeline has introduced. And if your next channel isn't imminently on the horizon, Madeline, what can the contact center do today that will make multi-channel just a little bit easier?
Sure. So here's what we would suggest is to merge for efficiency. You can do an incremental approach, and there's different ways that you can merge. Merging allows you to simplify and also gain efficiency. So there's 3 merges. One is that you can merge all channels into one unified queue, so that you're avoiding multiple systems to queue work, multiple systems for the agents to navigate, and you get the benefit of transparency across all of your work managed in one system. You can also merge agent interfaces, and again, like I mentioned earlier, it can be 2 flavors. One is look for opportunities to embed agent interfaces into critical applications, like, for instance, CRMs. So let's say that the average is 5 screens, right, Sarah? So if you embedded the agent interface into, let's say you're using Salesforce, now you've just taken 1 screen away that they have to navigate. So that agent interface is 1, so now you've changed that, and you've got a 20% efficiency gain because now they're not navigating between the agent interface and the CRM plus the other screens. So that can be an incremental approach. The other thing that you could do is, for instance, use a supplier that has APIs so that you can create your own custom interface, and that's more of that Lord of the Rings thing I was talking about. The basic idea here is that we would advance that it's better for you to purpose-build one for your company rather than using something that's off the shelf that is a unified single desktop, because you want one that really suits your business, that's purpose-built for you. And APIs are a great way to make that happen. And then the third merge is to merge multiple channels to individual agents. And again, if you start with that experimentation, you can have a much better idea of how it will impact the agent's experience, the customer experience, and also your operational goals. So those are the 3 types of merges that you can do to incrementally add some of that into your contact center. And when it comes to merging this, I think the cloud has a great opportunity. to help simplify that experience here, because you've got three things that you're trying to achieve. You're trying to achieve the agent experience and their engagement to be increased, the customer experience and therefore their engagement to be increased, and you've got all those operational goals to balance out. The cloud can help simplify that experience for people because it's very easy to experiment with new channels. You can add them, experiment with them in many ways with the cloud because it's easy to turn them on and turn them off. The other thing is that it's easy to add points of service so that if you have seasonal spikes, you want to add additional locations, you want to try out home agents, you can do it. And the beauty of it is because it's all on one system, all of them have access to, if you choose, all the different channels that you're beginning to implement, experiment with, and spread. That other point of that location independence and that unification is that regardless of where your contact centers are, you can harmonize both the agent interface, as we were talking about, but the rules, processes, and reporting are on one system of record. And it makes things more agile because it's faster. It's faster to implement. It's faster to make changes. You can change the volume. If you scale up or scale down or have seasonal spikes and lower items, you can make that happen. The lower volumes, you're only paying for the capacity that you need, and you don't have to be a rocket scientist to make simple changes to your system and routine changes. You don't have to engage pro services all the time. You don't have to engage your IT group to make regular and routine changes. So all of the levers of your contact center, agent-facing and self-service alike, can become dynamic tools because it's easier to make those changes. And you're assured of always being on the latest version of the software. You're not in that challenge of trying to justify capital expenditures to upgrade your system on the premise or to add that additional channel that you want and buy that module. You're always assured of access to all the basic technologies, all the new technologies. You're always on the latest version of the software through the power of the cloud. So it gives you more channels and access to experiment and implement, having as many locations as you like wherever they are. It's a unified experience for you from a management standpoint, a queuing standpoint. You have agility benefits and the latest technology. At InContact, that's all we're focused on. We're 100% cloud, and we're proud about it. We've got a lot of satisfied customers, and we've won some awards, as you can see there. But you really don't have to take my word for it. I'd encourage you to go see what our customers actually say about us. We've got over 70 customer testimonial videos on our website where you can hear them talk about the cloud, how it helped them, and specifically their experience with InContact. And we've got this analyst series, so you can download some free white papers to see if it's right for you. The other thing I'd mention from best practices and stuff is that we have this you can benchmark your contact center. It's got analyst advice based on how you respond, so you can get some idea about how you can improve your operations. It's free. You can go take that assessment and see how you stack up against other best practices and give you some suggestions to optimize today.
All right. Thank you so much, Madeline and Sarah, for all this great information. I think we'll go ahead and get to the audience questions. And we do have a lot of good ones today. So if we do not get to your question, don't worry. We will make sure all the questions are answered offline if we do not have time to answer them now. And we'll also be writing a follow-up article that will be posted to ICMI.com. So I think I will kick the first question over to you, Madeline, and this is a really interesting one. We have an audience member who asks, how do you measure and review the efficiency and productivity of an agent who's solely servicing customers through Facebook and Twitter?
Yes, I'm looking at that. So we assume there'd be all kinds of posts on social media. So that's an excellent question, and this is kind of the bleeding edge. We have got some existing customers who are very engaged on social media, and a lot of it has to do with experimentation, because initially it's going to be difficult for you to understand your KPIs and how you measure their efficiency. Let me give you some examples. A lot of it depends on your social media system, your ability to doing filtering. So for instance, maybe you have some type of productivity measure that you have for channels that you currently have today. A common practice is to try and figure out how to transfer some of those measures. When you get to social media, as this person who's asked the question, it kind of breaks down because every time a chat comes in, it's probably relevant. Every time an email comes in, it's probably relevant. There is less relevance in social media, especially if you're not using a platform that's purpose-built for service. You're going to get a lot more stuff that you have to filter out. I'll just give you some ideas on how they've handled that. Some ideas in the real world to try and increase that productivity and get to some measures that you're talking about, like how many different interactions should they handle in a day, et cetera, trying to come up with those KPIs. One customer has been doing the following. They have a center of excellence for social media, so it's a smaller group, and they rotate agents through, or when they're first inducted into the group, what they're literally doing is filtering. So they may be filtering between items that actually need to be responded to versus things that don't. And the rest of the agents, besides the people who are kind of doing that, do I respond or not respond, okay, that have gone through the initial social media filter, so there is some relevance, but do I do something or not, okay? They have a smaller group or one or two agents who are deciding whether or not a response is necessary based on business rules that have been established. And then the rest of the agents are actually only responding to the ones that need action. That's one way to get traction on a productivity standpoint and begin to set standards. So that's an idea. I hope that helps. That would be one idea that's been happening in the real world that has been able to help them establish efficiency standards.
Great. That's a really great answer. So we have another interesting question that comes from an audience member. They say that they've already flipped the on switch for their multi-channel, so they've set up phone, email, chat, and social, but they did it with no real framework or plan in mind. So how would you ladies recommend that a contact center go back and do it the correct way after the channels have already been turned on?
I can take that. Sarah, do you have anything you want to add on that?
Go ahead and kick it off, and I'll jump in.
Sure. So here's first of all, here's some ideas. You're paratrooper. You're in the middle of the situation. How do you begin to dig out and determine are we feeling well about it? Couple of ideas. Number one, whoever your current provider, well, you may be on different platforms. I don't know your individual situation, but first of all, I would consult with your providers to see if they have some benchmarks that you can compare against. That's number one. Number two, what if I were sitting in your situation is I would start with the customer experience and then work back in to your productivity. So, for instance, start with gut feel. Do you feel like, or do your customers seem to be satisfied if you have a voice of the customer? If you have a voice of the customer program, are they satisfied? Are there any differences in their satisfaction between those channels? And start with your least satisfaction channel and move out. And what I mean by that is that if you're trying to go back and determine the framework or plans on how to measure, I would prioritize, start from the least satisfied channel, work back, and then determine, well, what is the things I'm measuring today, do I consider myself to be productive? And if the satisfaction is lower and you consider yourself to be very productive, you may want to determine the quality measures that you have in place for your agents to see if they're spending enough time in discovery with the customer or in researching so that they can increase first call resolution or other items that you might be measuring. That's probably where I'd start. We don't have a lot of time. I'd love to talk about this in more detail, but the bottom line here is that if you're trying to dig out, prioritize it, go incrementally, and start determining if some of your standards and how you're measuring your agents or what standards you're holding them to might be depressing that customer sat. And start with those so that you're always dealing with the most high leverage channel to try and correct and establish the right KPIs. I hope that helps.
And I think you hit on it, very, very well. I happened to be in a contact center a couple years ago that I had adopted, and they had already had multiple channels, and honestly, it was a little bit of a mess. And one of the first things that we did was exactly what Madeline pointed out, was we looked at the CSAT of each one of the channels and really, put the right measurements in place. We looked at, where we were struggling, and then we sat down with the agents and we did time trials at their desktops, and we watched what worked and what didn't and where we could start to build those efficiencies in. And for each one of our channels, we put together a very detailed standard operating procedure. So an SOP, we went back to the basics and we wrote down everything, because that honestly helped us identify where we could start to get efficiencies and help the agents with productivity, which ultimately was going to impact that customer experience. And then, coincidentally, we sat down and we decided to consolidate a lot of our technologies, and we chose InContact. So I was a customer of theirs years ago because we honestly wanted to get on the cloud. We saw that as a reason and a way for us to streamline what was happening within our contact center. And then, to Madeline's point, experiment, experiment, experiment. Take some risks, put some things out there, see what works, pull it back when it doesn't, and that'll really help you, fix some of the multi-channel challenges that you're going through.
Great. This might make for an interesting follow-up article. It looks like we have time for probably one more question, and I'm going to direct this one over to you, Sarah. This is an interesting one from one of our audience members. It says, do you think that these survey results that we shared today would vary by geography, and especially in terms of customer preferences for channels and expected response times?
And the answer is absolutely yes. From a customer, what channels there's a preference. It doesn't vary dramatically, but there are certainly areas of the world which have adopted certain channels faster than others. And SMS is a perfect example of that. I used to live in the Philippines, and when I was there, everybody was operating, through SMS. And, customer service was actually happening in that channel there, in Asia, well before, anyone here in the U.S. Was utilizing it. So certainly there's going to be a quicker adoption to certain channels in certain places. And that's why, it also makes sense for you to really look at who your customer base is, what their channel preferences are, because you're going to want to, start to implement those channels that are most attractive to your particular customer base.
Great. Well, thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Madeline. I am afraid that unfortunately that is all the time we have for today. As I said earlier, if we did not get to your question, do not worry. We will be posting a follow-up article on ICMI.com, and we'll answer all questions left in the queue. In the meantime, if you happen to think of other questions, you can feel free to send them directly to me at estrother, STROTHER, at ICMI.com. Or you can always reach out to us on Twitter. Don't forget, you can also download a PDF version of the slide console shortly after we end this presentation, and this presentation will be made available on demand probably early next week, so look for an email letting you know when that presentation is ready to view on demand. I do need to mention that this presentation is copyright 2013 by ICMI. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted by ICMI, which is solely responsible for its content. And InContact is responsible for their content and their opinions. On behalf of ICMI and our sponsor InContact, we thank you for attending today.